Margaret sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her frail hands gripping her purse as if it were a lifeline. The worn leather felt familiar under her fingers, but nothing else did. The world outside the car window blurred past, street signs, trees, unfamiliar buildings. None of it looked like home. Ava sat behind the wheel, her posture straight, her face unreadable. She hadn't spoken much since they left the house. The silence between them felt heavy, like a wall Margaret couldn't climb. She studied her daughter's profile, searching for warmth, for reassurance, but found none. Margaret's breath hitched as she stole another glance at the passing scenery. The unease in her chest grew. She knew where they were going. She had heard the horror stories. Elderly people taken to nursing homes, left behind by the very ones they raised. The thought of being abandoned, of waking up in a strange place with no one familiar, sent a tremor through her fragile bones. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse tighter. "Ava," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where are we going?" Ava's fingers flexed on the steering wheel, but she didn't answer. Margaret swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing the words out before fear swallowed her whole. Are you taking me away?" Still, Ava said nothing. Margaret's heart clenched. A part of her wanted to believe this was just a trip, an errand, something harmless. But deep down, she felt the truth pressing against her ribs like a cold hand. Her daughter was taking her somewhere she didn't want to go. Her mind drifted, pulling her back to a memory. She could still remember the weight of baby Ava in her arms for the first time. She had been so tiny, so fragile, her dark curls barely covering her head. The nurses had hesitated when they handed the baby over, their eyes questioning why an elderly white woman would adopt a black child. But Margaret hadn't cared about their stares. She had held Ava close to her chest and whispered, "I will always protect you, I promise." But now, sitting in this car, watching the road unfold ahead like an uncertain future, Margaret wondered if that promise had been broken. Margaret's fingers twitched in her lap, her knuckles white against the worn leather of her purse. She kept her eyes on Ava, searching for a hint of warmth. Some sign that her daughter wasn't doing what Margaret feared the most. But Ava's face remained unreadable, her gaze locked on the road ahead, her expression cold, or maybe just distant. Margaret's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and dread. Had Ava grown tired of her? Was she too much of a burden now? She thought of all the little things, the way Ava had started handling more responsibilities around the house, the way she sighed when Margaret needed help standing up, the way she sometimes took a little longer to answer when Margaret called her name. Had it all been leading to this moment? Her heart twisted painfully as memories surfaced, memories of voices dripping with judgment. Why take in a child who doesn't even look like you? Mrs. Thompson from next door had sneered the day Margaret brought baby Ava home. "It's not natural. That girl will never see you as her real mother," another neighbor had whispered years later. Margaret had ignored them all. She had loved Ava fiercely, unconditionally. She had fought for her, protected her, raised her as her own. But now, sitting in the passenger seat of a car heading to an unknown destination, she wondered if everyone had been right. She opened her mouth, her voice fragile. "Ava, please, just tell me what's going on." Ava let out a slow breath, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Then finally she spoke. "It's for the best, Mom." The words sliced through Margaret's heart like a blade. She felt her breath catch, her chest tighten. That was it. That was the confirmation she had been dreading. Ava had made up her mind. She was taking Margaret away. Margaret turned to look out the window, blinking back the sting in her eyes. She had always believed love was enough, that no matter what, Ava would never let her go. But the silence that followed, the long, heavy, unbearable silence, felt like the final proof that she had been wrong. The only sound left in the car was the steady hum of the tires against the road, carrying Margaret toward what she was sure would be her new, unwanted fate. Margaret's gaze remained fixed on the blurred landscape outside the window, but her mind was miles away, lost in the past. Raising Ava hadn't been easy. Not because of Ava. No, never because of her. It was the world that had made it difficult. The stares when they walked down the street, the quiet judgment at grocery stores, the passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. "Are you her nanny?" strangers would ask. "She must be adopted," others would whisper. Margaret had ignored them all. She had loved Ava fiercely, protected her like a lioness. But now, sitting in this car, heading toward what she was sure was abandonment, she wondered if it had all been for nothing. A memory surfaced, one that still stung. Ava had been 10 years old, her small frame shaking with sobs as she clung to Margaret's dress. "I didn't cheat, Mom. I swear I didn't," Ava had cried, her brown eyes filled with fear and betrayal. Margaret had knelt in front of her, wiping the tears away. "Tell me what happened, sweetheart," Ava had sniffled. "Mrs. Carson said my essay was too good. She said a kid like me couldn't have written it by myself." Margaret had felt something dark and furious rise in her chest. She had stormed into the school, her presence a force of nature as she pushed open the principal's office door. "Are you telling me my daughter is too intelligent to be black?" Margaret's voice had been sharp, unwavering. The principal had stammered, trying to find the right words, but Margaret didn't give him the chance. "You will apologize to my daughter, and you will make sure that teacher never humiliates her like that again. If not, I will make sure every newspaper in this town knows what kind of school you're running." By the end of the day, Mrs. Carson had given a forced apology, and Ava's essay had been graded fairly. But the damage had already been done. That was the first time Margaret realized just how much the world would try to break Ava down. And it wouldn't be the last. She had spent years fighting for Ava, shielding her from ignorant remarks, standing up for her when no one else would. She had taught Ava to be proud, to never let anyone make her feel small. And now Ava was the one making her feel small. Margaret swallowed the lump in her throat. "I never treated her differently," she thought. "I never let her feel like she wasn't my daughter. So why is she abandoning me now?" She turned her head slightly, watching Ava's expressionless face. The girl she had raised, loved, and protected was now taking her somewhere she didn't want to go. Margaret clenched her fists, the ache in her heart almost unbearable. She had spent her whole life fighting for Ava. But who was going to fight for her? The car slowed as Ava turned into a long driveway, the tires crunching against the gravel. Margaret's heart pounded against her ribs as she took in the large building ahead. It was modern, clean, and well-kept, but to her it looked like a prison. Her stomach dropped. A facility. Her biggest fear had come true. Margaret's fingers gripped the door handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel her breath quickening, panic rising like a tide she couldn't control. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, no, Ava, please." Ava pulled the car into a parking spot and shifted into park. She didn't look at Margaret right away. Her hands rested on the wheel, her shoulders tense, as if she were bracing herself. Margaret turned to her, desperation clawing at her throat. "I don't want to live in a home," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I can still take care of myself. She stopped because even she knew that wasn't entirely true. Lately, the stairs felt taller. Her hands weren't as steady, and some mornings it took longer to get out of bed than she wanted to admit. But that didn't mean she was ready for this. Ava finally turned to her. There was something in her eyes, something conflicted, something heavy. But she stayed silent. Margaret searched her daughter's face for any sign of warmth, for some reassurance that this wasn't what it looked like. But Ava only reached for her seatbelt and unclicked it. Margaret's chest tightened. "Please, Ava," she choked out. "You don't have to do this. I won't be a burden. I promise. I can try harder. I can—" Ava opened the door and stepped out. Margaret felt a sob rising, but she swallowed it down. She would not cry. She would not make a scene. She still had some dignity left. A moment later, Ava opened her door, holding out a hand to help her out. Margaret stared at it. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to sit in that car and never move, force Ava to look her in the eye and explain. But the truth was, she couldn't do this alone. Her legs wobbled slightly as she stepped out, gripping Ava's arm for support. The warmth of her daughter's touch sent a pang of sorrow through her. How many times had she held Ava's hand just like this, guiding her across the street, steadying her when she tripped as a child, holding her close when she cried. And now, here they were. Margaret felt powerless. She was being led into a place she didn't want to go by the very person she thought would always stand by her side. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had given Ava everything, and now Ava was taking it all away. Margaret hesitated at the entrance, her heart still racing. The inside of the building was nothing like she'd expected. Instead of the sterile white walls and the faint medicinal scent of a nursing home, she was met with the warm scent of lavender and polished wood. The lobby was bright and welcoming, decorated with soft lighting and cozy furniture. But her fear wasn't gone yet. Ava walked ahead, leading her down a hallway. Margaret followed slowly, gripping her purse as if it were a lifeline. Finally, Ava stopped in front of a door. Margaret's throat tightened. Her daughter pulled out a set of keys and pressed them into Margaret's palm. Margaret blinked. "What?" Ava smiled softly. "Open it, Mom." With shaky hands, Margaret inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door clicked open, revealing a spacious, beautifully decorated apartment. Margaret stepped inside cautiously, her breath catching in her throat. The soft, cream-colored walls were adorned with framed photos, her photos, pictures of her and Ava throughout the years. Their first Christmas together, Ava's high school graduation, their road trips, birthday celebrations, quiet moments frozen in time. The living room was filled with elegant yet comfortable furniture, a bookshelf lined with her favorite novels, and a cozy armchair that looked just like the one she used to have in their old home. Tears welled up in her eyes. She turned to Ava, her voice barely above a whisper. "What? What is this?" Ava smiled, but there was emotion behind it. "This is your home, Mom." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I bought it for you." Margaret felt like the ground had shifted beneath her. She stared at Ava, stunned, unable to form words. "I know you're struggling, but I also know how much you value your independence," Ava continued. "I didn't want you to feel like you were being put away. I wanted you to have a place where you could be safe, comfortable, and still be you." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth as a sob escaped. You did this for me?" Ava nodded. "You took care of me when I had nothing, Mom. You fought for me. You gave me love when no one else would. This is the least I could do." Margaret's knees felt weak, and before she knew it, she was enveloped in Ava's arms. "I thought you were abandoning me," Margaret whispered through her tears. Ava held her tighter. "Never." Margaret let out a shaky breath, her fears dissolving into the warmth of her daughter's embrace. She wasn't being abandoned. She was being given a gift, one that spoke louder than any words ever could. Margaret's body trembled as the weight of her mistake crashed down on her. Tears spilled down her wrinkled cheeks, her sobs coming in sharp, uneven gasps. She clutched her chest, feeling like her heart might break from the sheer force of emotion. Ava immediately pulled her into a hug, wrapping her arms around her as if to hold her together. "I would never abandon you, Mom," Ava whispered, her voice filled with quiet strength. "Never." Margaret buried her face in Ava's shoulder, gripping onto her like she was afraid to let go. I thought you didn't want me anymore." Ava pulled back slightly, her hands still resting on Margaret's arms. "How could you ever think that?" she asked softly, looking her mother in the eyes. Margaret shook her head, ashamed. "I let my fears get the best of me," she admitted. "I thought maybe I was a burden." Ava's expression tightened, pain flickering across her face. "Mom, you're not a burden. You never were." She cupped Margaret's hands in hers. "You saved me. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You fought for me when the world tried to push me down." Do you really think I could ever turn my back on you? Margaret let out another shaky sob, squeezing Ava's hands. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Ava smiled through her own tears. There's nothing to be sorry for. I just want you to know you're not alone. You never will be. Margaret let out a small, tearful laugh, shaking her head. And to think I was ready to fight my way out of that car. Ava chuckled, wiping Margaret's tears away. Oh, I could tell. You were gripping that purse like a weapon. Margaret laughed through her tears, shaking her head. Old habits. Ava squeezed her mother's hands one more time before leading her to the couch. Come on, let's sit. You've had enough of an emotional roller coaster for today. As Margaret sat down, she exhaled deeply, finally allowing herself to breathe. She had spent so much time fearing the worst that she had almost missed the beautiful truth. Ava had never stopped loving her. And in this moment, she had never felt more loved. Sunlight bathed the small porch in a golden glow as Margaret sat in her favorite chair, a warm cup of tea cradled in her hands. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. She glanced up as Ava stepped onto the porch, holding a basket of fresh groceries. I got your favorite tea, Mom, Ava said with a smile, setting the bag down beside her. Margaret chuckled. You spoil me too much. Ava pulled up a chair, sitting beside her. That's the least I can do. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just enjoying each other's presence. The fear, the doubts, everything that once clouded Margaret's heart had faded. Ava had proved in ways Margaret never imagined that love wasn't about obligation. It was about choice, and Ava had chosen her, just as Margaret had chosen Ava all those years ago. Margaret reached for Ava's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Her voice was thick with emotion as she whispered, I thought I lost you, but you were giving me everything. Ava's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. We've always had each other, Mom, and we always will. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over them, Margaret closed her eyes, letting happiness settle deep in her heart. She was home. She was loved. And that was everything.